May have heard the name John Watts. He was named 2011 Library Journal Mover and Shaker. He is in the first cohort of the ACRL Assessment and Action Program. He also won the ACRL Instruction Session Innovation Award. John received his BFA in acting from Webster University and his library degree from both of our alma maters, Indiana University. He is currently serving as the Instruction Liaison Librarian at Webster University, and he has presented at numerous conferences including ALA, LOEX, Higher Learning Commission Annual Conference, and the Association for Institutional Research Annual Conference, among others. So without further ado, I present to you the one, the only, John Watts.
Hey, yay. Thank you so much, Megan. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to advance the slide. Oh, it's thinking about it. Welcome, everybody, and good morning from St. Louis, Missouri. Oh, they're putting my slides up. There we go. Welcome. I am so excited to be here with you all, even though we're spread apart and all over the place. I feel like this is a really great opportunity for us to kind of come together and brainstorm some ideas for making presentations pop. So I'm very, very passionate about public speaking, and just a little bit more about me. My background is in theater. So I started at a conservatory for theater arts for 4 years, and it was a very, very intensive program with a lot of practice. And when I graduated, I began working in theater companies in New York and Chicago, and then later as an actor, and then later as a dramaturg, so doing research for new playwrights, and that's kind of where I found my love of libraries and moved into that realm. So while some people might consider a Bachelor of Fine Arts in acting the equivalent of a certificate in underwater basket weaving, if you're no longer in that field, I think that my experience in acting has really, really helped me to be a better teacher, presenter, and overall librarian. I think it helps you to keep things interesting, to focus on your partner, and if you fall down, pick yourself back up and go on with the show. So today I hope that I can provide some tips, and that you can share some of your own, but tips that have really helped me with my background in performance, as well as presenting at different conferences, and just throughout my job as a librarian from the day to day. So when I first started presenting and teaching classes, I was really, really nervous. I was kind of a wreck because I thought it was so different for me, going from, dressing up and reading and memorizing someone else's words and performing those on stage didn't really translate for me. So I remember calling up my old acting teacher and telling her all of this. And I said, so what do I do? And she was like, well, focus on your partner. So, and my partner being my audience. And so we're going to talk a little bit about strategies for doing that. She also said, well, are you practicing your presentations? And I was like, well, no, not doing that at all. And she was like, okay, so what's the first thing you learn is that practice, practice, practice makes permanent. It doesn't always make perfect, but it makes things more permanent and easier for you to discuss in your head and with others. So anyway, so that's kind of my background, where I'm coming from today. And here's the promise for today. So I always like to kind of tell people where we're headed. We're going to identify techniques used by actors, stand-up comedians, and professional speakers to curb presentation jitters. Identify opportunities for engaging an audience through active participation and gamification. And then we're going to discuss options for including visual aids that enhance a presentation and illustrate main ideas. Finally, we're going to recognize the potential for humor, storytelling, and just plain fun in a professional presentation. So one other thing that I'm going to do right now is I just kind of want to get a feel for the audience and what everybody's thinking right now. So I'm going to open this poll here, and I'm dragging it in and opening it. So when it comes to giving a presentation, you are which of the following? Is it a total rock star, cool as a cucumber, looking for a little inspiration, on the verge of a nervous breakdown? So I'll give you some time. And I think I can actually broadcast results here. So we're leaning toward looking for a little inspiration, which I hope, because that's why we're here today, to inspire. Great. Okay, so it looks like we have primarily we're looking for a little inspiration, and then we're half and half on cool as a cucumber. So props to you guys, and then also on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And Lord knows we've all been there. And sometimes presentations are just enough to put you over that edge and make you want to throw up in your handbag. But that hopefully we'll get some strategies today that will help us not to feel a little bit better about that. So I'm going to end this poll. And I'm going to move it back over. So we have our learning outcomes, and one other thing too that I just want to say, we all have our inner dialogue. So my inner dialogue typically is about my desire to eat donuts and then my fight to not eat them. But there's a certain mantra that I always like to keep as an undercurrent whenever I'm preparing for a presentation. And so that's kind of our very first tip is WIFM. So WIFM is kind of a little way to synthesize what's in it for me. And by me, I mean the audience. So when you're going to a presentation, you're kind of going, you're sometimes you go to support a friend, but really, and you're not there to just hear about the cool things that other people are doing. You're there to see what they're doing and how you can apply that to your library. So I think it's really, really about always keeping your audience in mind and thinking about not just sharing what I know and how great I am. And you're great, that's awesome, and you should feel that way about it. But you should focus your energy on your audience and really, really think about what's in it for them. Okay, because that's really what they're thinking the whole time. So I'm just going to advance this slide. And actors keep this in mind often when they work together in scenes. So the best actors always consider, how can I affect my partner? How can I focus my energy in order to make my partner feel the way I want them to feel? And this is a little quote from my favorite acting teacher. She's old school. She's awesome. Her name is Uta Hagen. And she's all kind of really touchy-feely, all about talking about affecting your partner and focusing on them. And again, that's kind of where my acting teacher from the conservatory was going when she said, so focus on your partner. If you focus on your partner, it becomes less about you and your nervousness or or getting caught up in your content and more about them. And I think that comes across really, really well for your audience, and it really, really speaks to them in a way that's in a very tacit way. So let's also talk about how educators approach this. So educators will often write learning outcomes. And this is really tiny on my screen, so I hope that you can see it. So outcomes are a really, really great way to sort of get your bearings to focus on what you want your attendees to come out of this looking like. So what does your perfect attendee look like? How do you want them to leave that room? And how do you want them to feel when they leave that room? So you want them to know things, but you also want them to have a certain feeling. Do you want them to feel empowered? Do you want them to feel excited about a new idea? So learning outcomes include a skill and a knowledge. So what are people going to do? Are they going to create something? Are they going to evaluate something? So are you asking them to create a lesson plan? Are you asking them to evaluate a collection in a certain way that you've done so and had some success with? And then what knowledge are they going to use to do this? So this creates kind of a roadmap for your attendees and for you. So you kind of know, once you've selected these learning outcomes, then you know exactly how to plan your outline for your presentation. you know what are the most important things and what can kind of go to the wayside. And this is one of my favorite gestures for like just getting rid of a bunch of crap that you really don't need to talk about in a presentation. So you'll see me doing this a lot. So it's major with them. What's in it for me? It's all about your students, and it's very student and attendee centered is what it really should be. So think about your attendees as students. You're there as a teacher to teach them what you're doing in your research, what you're doing in your practice, and how that can apply to them. Um, so uh, so let's see, I am going to talk now. I'm going to share with you some things I've learned in the hopes that you can turn around and use it in your own work life. So, and that's kind of how learning outcomes work too. So the next tip is make choices. So make a choice about what you're going to present. You have to decide what is the most important thing. So you know you have your topic, but you really, really need to decide what's important and what can we get rid of. So we often have this impulse to share everything, every step of the way. So for example, this is how we rebuilt our website, and here are the names of everyone on the team, and here are the 8 softwares that we use to make it happen. And here was the color of the sky in the morning that we introduced the new interface. So it's like some people just really, really want to go on and on because it's all important to you at the time, right? So all of that was very, very important. But if you don't make choices about what to share and what not to share, you've kind of made the choice to fail, because dumping too much information on your colleagues is really, really going to set them in a poor direction. It confuses people, and it also tends to make your most cogent points, the kind of points that you really want to build muscles around, it makes them kind of flabby. So so here's what I really recommend doing is there's kind of a process to this. So consider what are your most important concepts. So this goes back to your learning outcomes, right? So what do I want my attendees to walk out of the door knowing how to do or feeling? So how do I want them to feel? And then build your presentation around these concepts. So so what are the most important? And usually for an hour presentation, you kind of want to have, I would say 3 or 4. You don't want to go too crazy. So that's another thing that you know, librarians have a hard time with, brevity in some cases. So really, really pick and choose. And then what concepts have direct application? So what is, you know, what's special to your school, but what's something that's universal about your presentation that anyone could apply? So pick those out too. Your most important concepts are something that you're going to reiterate throughout your presentation. So you're going to check in about those. You're going to repeat yourself a little bit. The concepts that have direct application for the students or the attendees are something that you're just going to touch on briefly. And then what's worth being familiar with? So I think that's kind of those are the things that you should probably leave out of your presentation. Identify these things, but put them elsewhere. So this is where the magic of handouts comes in. And I know that handouts as a physical thing have kind of gone to the wayside at conferences just to save paper. But they're typically then put online on the conference website. I know too that LibGuides, or if you have research guides, have really become a popular place to put materials for a presentation. Often I'll see a tiny URL on a screen and say, go here for, you know, further information about the color of the sky on the day that we released our interface. So that's a really, really popular place for people to put things. And so I think that these are the decisions you really, really have to make in order to in order to really, really get your point across and to really make it student-centered. So you really have to make those decisions up front and decide what you really want to introduce, reinforce, touch on, and then kind of leave as a supplement to what you really, what you talked about. So Okay, so great. And I also just got a message that some people are IT and not librarians, so no worries. I think that what we're talking about today is definitely outside of the realm of libraries, and we can definitely touch on that. And if you have any specific questions as to how these principles apply to IT, by all means, ask away. So I am getting questions in the box as we go along. So yeah, and if anybody has any questions at this time, I can address them. Please, by all means, just pop up. I'll do my best to check. I'm on dual screens right now, so I'm looking at a camera, but I'll check in as much as I possibly can. Um, so this is kind of in the planning phase we've talked about. So how am I going to plan my presentation, um, and really kind of get the skeleton, the bones of that presentation off and running. Um, I often have people that I talk to who are really, really nervous about um, about presenting, so they get a lot of jitters. And I think that one of the most important parts of a presentation is warming up. So I'm a runner, and when I first started running like 5K races, so there's a 3 mile race. Back in the day, I would just kind of like show up at the at the start line, and I would just start running, right? So, and then I found out that like I was actually finally warmed up. I was ready to run halfway through the race. So, starting out cold was making me slower. And I found out, by doing some research that actually I should be like sweating by the time I'm at the start line. So I should be ready to go. And I think that the same applies for presentations. So I think that it's really, really helpful to get your body warm and to get your breathing in the right place, um, and then also to kind of relieve yourself of that inner nervousness, those jitters that we often get. So I'm just going to start with a couple of different techniques that I like to use. And it's a little difficult to do this in a webinar. Often I'll have people do this along with me, but I'll discuss it as we go now, and I'd like you to just kind of practice on your own. But this is a picture. I just had to put this in for Megan and I because these are the warm-ups. The warm-up pants for the basketball team at Indiana University, where we both got our graduate degrees. And I just think they're hilarious. So I just feel like, oh, those poor people. Breathing. I think, of course, breathing is probably the most important thing that you can do. And it's the most important thing that you can focus on. So often actors will I had entire courses in breathing all throughout my time at the conservatory. I spent years studying breathing. And what's really, really important is using the certain muscles that you really need to use. What I'd like everybody to do right now is to just take a deep breath on your own. I know that I can't see you, but just take a deep breath. Okay, so awareness time. If you went like this and your shoulders went up, it means that you're really not using your diaphragm. So diaphragmatic breathing is really how you're going to get that deep, soothing breath, that breath that really grounds you and helps you to project, but also helps you to feel a little less nervous when you're speaking to others. So we tend to come up here whenever we're put on the spot, right? And I know that whenever I'm nervous, if somebody calls me out in a meeting, I immediately go up here. Oh yes, well I know this will be great. So making sure that when you're breathing, that you are using your diaphragm. And a really, really great way to kind of test out, well, where is my diaphragm? I have no idea. Well, first you have to make sure that you're okay with just letting your belly go. So you just have to let that sucker go. So, but what I always like to do is, it's kind of like stifling a yawn. So if you kind of pretend to stifle a yawn, you'll feel your diaphragm spreading out. And this is just something to do prior to. Often it's too hard to think about when you're presenting if you've got a lot going on. But before, take a minute and just really focus on that breath, because that's going to calm you down. If you're not used to doing it, it might make you a little lightheaded, but with practice, you'll get a lot better. So definitely breathing. Something that I really think is important. There's also a for stretching. I think that just warming your body up helps so much. Now you don't have to be sweating like I do when I'm running a race coming in. Now that would just be awkward, right? But it is really helpful just to get your body warm and get it moving, because you'll find that we're going to talk about movement a little later, that natural movement will be easier for you if your body's a little warmed up. And one thing that I really like is Nicole Diavilla. She's a yogi, and she wrote a book, or she actually has a really great website, and she wrote a book about this. But she has a thing called 2-minute yoga, and I'm going to put that URL in the chat box. So 2-minute yoga is really great. I often do this in my office right before I go and I do a class, or if I'm going to a really intense meeting. I know that we have one program coordinator here, so I know that sometimes those meetings with when you're a program coordinator can be kind of intense. So just to kind of prepare my body and get things going, I'll do this 2-minute yoga. And I mean, 2 minutes is not a huge commitment, but it really does help. Again, focusing on your breath, but also focusing on your body, and making sure that you're taking care of that. Bad ballet. So this is kind of another one that that's difficult to describe. But what happens often is, and you'll hear this, and even if you're in many cases, definitely with actors and stand-up comedians, is they'll say, if they bombed, if things went really wrong, they'll say this: "Oh, I was in my head. I was just too much in my head." Well, okay, so that happens often. So bad ballet is basically you just doing some really goofy dancing. So jumping up and down, and often it's you saying some of what you're going to present. So if it's something really like, "Good morning, everybody. Here I am to talk to you," and it kind of helps you to get centered and get your body focused on just letting go. Just let go. And then focus is another one that I really like. And often a lot of people will take some time beforehand. But one thing that to sort of focus their mind, their body on the task at hand, which is the presentation. One other thing that I really like that comes from Uta Hagen is having an endowed prop. So something that you either have on your body, maybe it's a necklace, maybe it's something that you just hold in your hand that's really small. And if you do have the jitters, you can, if you're that person who's on the verge of a nervous breakdown, hold on to that. And it can be as, I have a friend who has this little rubber goldfish named Goldie, and she holds it, and it kind of helps her. She kind of uses that to take on the energy of her nerves, and for her it really works. And in acting, it's often any kind of prop that helps to kind of make that character whole. And I think that helps with presentations too. Somehow, if you're able to channel your energy, you can kind of make yourself whole in doing so. So those are sort of ways that I like to prepare and get myself ready right beforehand. So if you're at a conference, skip the keynote if you're up next. Don't go to a session. Just give yourself some time to really warm your body up, warm your mind up, warm your voice up. Tongue twisters are always fun too. And a really good tongue twister that I like is just saying red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather, red, a bunch of times. And you can get faster and faster and faster, and you're really chewing those words. So it's really easy then to say like LexisNexis after that. Okay, so next. Really important, I think. This is one of my favorites. Tell a story. So I think that good presentations that I've seen with okay content are made great with stories. I remember I was at the American Library Association once, and this woman was doing a presentation basically about how she put toys in her library. So, and I mean, it was a full-blown hour-long presentation, and really all she did was put toys in the library. So she had pretty horrific slides too. They were pretty bad, like really blurry, and like there were misspellings and text issues and all kinds of things. And it's kind of silly content. Here we are, we put toys in the library, and I know that that's important, but at the same time, I was kind of like, really, this is what you're going to present about? But what made that presentation for me was the awesome story she told about the people in that library that were affected by those toys and how it changed the way children interacted with each other, how they kind of gained confidence because of that, and how they were motivated to read stories as a result of those toys. So a good story will really, really draw your audience in. And I think that the most important part about this is really finding the voice uh, of a storyteller is really, really important. So finding your own voice. And the research really shows that we pay attention to well-spoken narratives, so that sound really, really human, and that are spoken in a conversational and human voice. So, it's and the research is kind of telling us that our brain, not our conscious brain, but our subconscious, doesn't really know the difference between listening or reading a conversational narrative, um, like a presentation, or just having a conversation. So formal speech is kind of devoid of emotion and in an authentic self. And it's difficult for your audience to stay with. But a conversational piece, a conversational tone really helps the listener feel subconsciously engaged, as if they were ready to join that conversation at any moment. So what's really, really important about this is to just be authentic, and don't try to be someone you're not. So if you're not super gregarious, that's okay. If you have a really dry sense of humor, really work on that, and use that to your benefit. But I think that finding that, really identifying what makes you tick, what kind of things really make your friends like you, and really, really find that and find your voice in your stories. So here's a few tips to creating a good story. So, and a lot of people will say, I'm not a good storyteller, right? I'm terrible at telling stories. And often, and we've all seen those people. Hello. Um, but I think that it's a very learned skill. So it's something that you can learn how to do. I mean, they have total workshops, classes on these sort of things. So go back to your outcomes. Okay, so identify important points. So and make sure that at least one of those important points has a really good story behind it. And to find a really good story, first you're going to brainstorm. So go back and kind of close your eyes about that important point. What led you to this discovery, or what led you to this kind of awesome revelation that we found at our library, or in our IT department, or in our program? So what was that? And who are the people that were engaged in this? After that, I think it's really, really important to kind of get it out of you. So it's all kind of swimming up in here, but the best thing to do is, if you're really visual, by all means, storyboard it. So start kind of drawing it out on Post-it notes. Or if you like to use PowerPoint, then that's cool too, or any kind of slides would work great. So kind of get an idea about if that's your thing, getting really visual with it. That's going to help you to see that beginning, middle, and end of the story. If you're a really auditory person like I am, I need to talk it out. So I need to get on the phone with a friend, or I need to talk to one of my colleagues. And I need to say, okay, so I'm thinking about this story. Here's how it goes. And then they can give me feedback and say, well, you kind of lost me at this point. I don't really know where, the flying dragon came in. That was kind of random. And then of course it's just practice. And it goes back to my professor saying, like, are you practicing? No. Well, then it's not going to really get good. And a lot of people have a hard time practicing on their own. So practice with that friend if you can, or a colleague. And stories, what's great is stories are so a part of the human race. Like that's how we've communicated for years and years and years. So they're not always great right off the bat, but I guarantee you they get better with time. And so if you start telling it at one conference, it's only going to get better. So you'll know when the fun part comes in, when the humor comes out, and you can really play to that. So I think that that's a really really important thing to do, and I couldn't stress that enough. Is really find that story, um, and uh, and how that relates and how you can really emphasize your points. There's a book that I really really like called Presentation Zen, and I have it on my list of references. And there's a whole chapter about telling your story and how to really kind of get that going if you're not someone who naturally tells stories. So I'm going to move on. We are at the halfway point here. So I also really wanted to talk a little bit about humor. And humor is something that I take very, very seriously. Um, and then again, a lot of people will say, I'm not funny. Well, it's actually true that that humor is something that can be learned, and it really is kind of all in timing, and it's really all in practice. And again, it's really all about sharing that with friends and getting feedback. Just like writing, just like basically anything you're going to learn how to do. But what I really recommend first is finding a model. You know, not to, and that model can be anybody. It can be a friend that you think is really funny, a coworker that you think is really funny. It can be a stand-up comedian, an actor, a politician. Hello. Funny for the right reasons. But not funny, haha, not funny, strange. But so find that model. For instance, I don't know, I'm really drawn to this stand-up comedian named Margaret Cho, and she's this, you know, short Korean female. And so, but I really, really love how she talks about her family, and I typically like to do that too. So I kind of study her and I look at, you know, so what does she pick out about her family that's really funny, and how is that conveyed to the audience in a certain way? So find a model, find somebody that you really, really enjoy. Um, and so also with humor, I will say that humor can be a really slippery slope. And so this is something that I've done quite a bit of research on in the past. And I work a lot with a friend who wrote a book about using humor in library instruction or just in instruction in general. So there, I'm going to just go over like the good and the bad of humor. So let's advance here. So so humor is good in many ways. At first, it promotes attention. So it actually, the research suggests that it tickles that part of the brain that's susceptible to gambling or any addiction, really. So what happens is if you do use humor, the audience is sort of gently compelled to keep their attention in order to get more. Um, and it's also really, really important at this time too to keep that sense of self. But as long as you're getting that audience to sort of tip them off in the beginning, but doing so in a genuine way, then you can actually, I think, you can roll with it, and you can start to give a little more humor intermittently throughout your presentation. And that's going to help to keep your audience engaged. And again, that goes back to that with them. What's in it for me? It makes things more memorable. If you do make a joke, again, that part of your brain, it really sinks in, and it becomes something that you say, oh, okay, well, I don't really exactly remember the data points that they had on that chart, but I do remember that awesome joke they made about pie charts. And I mean, if I had a nickel for every time I heard a joke about a pie chart, it makes you more likable. So people can identify with you in ways, especially if you use some sort of analogies. For example, when I talk about Academic Search Complete in a class, or if I talk about it in a presentation, Academic Search Complete, if you're not familiar, is a database that's multidisciplinary. It's huge. It has articles from all different disciplines, different types of articles. And I always say, to me, it's like the Walmart of databases. Walmart is like a super mega store, and I don't know if everybody has that or if they're familiar with it, but it's a super mega store where you can get, bacon and flip-flops at the same time. So, and there's good to that, and then there's bad to that. So the good is that it's super convenient. The bad is that you're going to be wandering around looking for flip-flops and bacon. And if you really wanted just batteries, good luck. Those sort of analogies, other people can assimilate with that. They can say, oh yeah, I hate Walmart too. Or yeah, I bought bacon and flip-flops last weekend. So it makes you more approachable sometimes. And then if you totally flop, it makes people really freak out. We'll talk about that later. And also humor puts people at ease. So of course we know that that humor is and laughing is really, really good for us. It releases endorphins and it makes people feel good. So that's really, really helpful. And I just noticed here that I have, let me just move this over. I have a question. I find it hard to storytell when trying to convey notions. Yeah, I think I see your point there. I think again, when you're trying to convey notions, what I recommend is really picking, and if it doesn't have to be for everything, but I think picking one point in your presentation for a story, or humor. This can apply to humor too. You pick that point, and it's I like to do it also in the beginning because it tends to sort of warm the crowd up a little bit. So even if your story sort of starts out your presentation, I think that's a really, really good place to do it. You don't have to do stories throughout. Pick one really important outcome and then use it to illustrate that. So I hope that answers your question. If not, then we can go further. And I'll be taking questions at the end. So I hope that helps in some way. Let's go on to the bad in humor. So it can alienate your audience, right? So if nobody gets that, if nobody knows about Walmart, then they're going to be like, well, I don't know what you're talking about, so I'm going to tune out right now. And then the worst is, is that you could offend someone. And sometimes if you're gonna be really edgy, and humor's edgy, and I mean, it's happened to me. It's happened to a lot of people that I know who use humor in their presentations, in their classes. You're taking a risk. You are taking a risk when you're really going for that laugh, and you're really going to try to not be neutral. I'm going to pick a side here, and I'm going to go with it, and I'm going to make fun of something, or I'm going to, I'm going to really play something up. And some of the stand-up comedians that are the most popular are really what we call blue. So they're very dirty. And I'm not saying you should tell dirty jokes at your presentations, but I'm just saying, the bigger the edgier you are, often the more laughs you get, or the more ridicule you'll get for telling that joke. So I typically tend to play it pretty safe, but I know people who really go for it, and they're willing to take that risk, and they do really well sometimes, and sometimes they fall flat on their face. If you fall flat on your face, that goes to our third one. It can make you feel like crawling into a hole and dying a terrible, terrible death. And it is the worst feeling in the world sometimes when a joke doesn't land. And then like you just start sweating, right? You get that kind of back sweat. That happens to me all the time. So that's, I think that's the downside of using humor. And that's just that's a choice that everybody has to make. So I'm going to move on here. We have about 20 minutes left. Okay, so to read or not to read, that is the question. So the thing that I dislike about reading is I think that it takes it away from that rhythm, that connection with your audience. So the dangers is that the biggest danger is that you're breaking eye contact, right? So I'm doing my best right now to stare into this camera because I know that that's how we connect as human beings, is through eye contact. But I think that's, and I also believe that really important narrative voice gets cut off if you're reading text. I think unless you're like a really great professional reader, or you spent 4 years in a conservatory learning to read lines, in an audition, then, by all means, read, but I I I am of the camp that says that, having bullet points and just sort of working off of those is going to be far more engaging. And I actually have had experiences in the beginning of my career when I would do a presentation and I would read it. I'd write it all out and I would read it off of my iPad, and then in the feedback forums, that was my biggest criticism. So I do really, I wholeheartedly believe that. But if you're feeling a little less prepared to do that, really what it is it just takes practice, practice, practice. But if you're feeling less prepared, it's way better to read than to crash and burn, right? Again, that's a decision that you really have to make. Okay, I'm going to also move on to visual aids. Okay, so obviously I'm a fan of visual aids in that, especially for webinars, right? Because I just would hate for you guys to just be looking at a video of me sitting in my office the whole time. But I do believe that they can do two things. It's kind of like humor. They can really bring out the light and the energy of your presentation. They can convey really, really great information that people who are more visual will see or will feel internally than if you had just spoken the words. But if done poorly, they can really take you down. So, and I think that a lot of people know about the major hangups, the crowded text. So I just have text all over the place. That always tends to kind of be like, well, I'm presenting, not my slides. So I want people to focus on me. So really, if you are going to use text, you really should sort of keep that at a minimum. And I do believe that images are great. I think we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But one other thing too that I did was doing a little research on color. And often you don't have much of a choice with some of the presentation softwares out there with your colors. But I know that in PowerPoint, what I'm using now is you can choose what color your slides are, and you can get crazy. Also with charts and graphs, if you're looking at numerical data or even qualitative data, and you're trying to make things to get that point across, to do some sort of visual information visualization, there are some principles along color schemes that are really, really important. And the two really big ones are analogous colors, so colors that are near each other on the color wheel. So these are kind of not necessarily, they're almost basically the same color, but they just have a different hue, a different intensity. And so those are really, really helpful to keep your slides and your graphs and your charts less distracting. So they also tend to be a little bit more visually appealing to people, to a wider scale of people. In addition, you have complementary or these complementary sort of colors. So these are created from colors opposite on the color wheel. And what's nice about these is they're opposites, but they work together, and they really can make your charts and graphs or your slides pop if you're really looking for that contrast, while they're still able to sort of work together, but they also kind of bring each other out. So that's really, really helpful too. One other thing that you always want to keep in consideration too is I think that a good 30%, it was 25 or 30% of the population, the world population, is colorblind, mostly men. And that typically falls along the lines of reds and greens. So if you are, say it's the holidays and you wanted to make a red and green chart, I would really stay away from that, because someone in your audience will be colorblind and they'll have a difficult time seeing your information. So that's just my bit on color, and I'm not an expert on color. I'm actually really bad at dressing myself and finding outfits. So I've been told by my sister and my parents. But I have done a little research, and this is kind of a nice way to make sure that your slides and your information is working together. Okay, images. The research is, I've also looked at some research on this, and it's really, really fascinating. One thing that I've been looking at is that images, rather than text, are really, really helpful in your presentations because the brain functions that process visual information. It processes that information differently. So our brains are actually wired, and that piece of the brain that processes visuals, so processes images, are evolutionarily older than the parts that process verbal information. And so responses to images tend to be more emotional and impactful. So this is played out everywhere. I mean, somebody could tell you a story about war-torn country, but you may not feel anything until you actually see images of that war-torn country. And that sort of played out with the way television changed how we look at the world in general and how we see people and our empathy for others. So images are something that's going to also make your ideas pop. Okay, softwares. There's a lot of different softwares out there. Powtoon is an animated software. SlideRocket is the same. So SlideRocket is proprietary, so you do have to pay for that. Powtoon is free. Prezi is a good one for people who like I think it's a Flash-based software, and it looks really, really cool. It's very flashy. It's very different. You work from a canvas, and your canvas swivels around, so that's also animated. However, I do find that some people, that makes them a little dizzy and a little sick. Haiku Deck is what I'm using right now for my big images. It's actually really great. It searches for Creative Commons free images. And then, of course, slides in Google Drive are really, really great because you can work with others on that if you're putting a presentation together from somebody who's across the country, which often you probably find yourself doing. Okay, next. I'm always a fan of taking a break and getting people engaged. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm just going to bring out this poll. So I think that giving up control and taking breaks and letting other people be a part of the conversation in your presentations is really important. So answer these questions. So how comfortable are you with giving up control during a presentation? I'm going to broadcast results here. We've got some comfortables. Good. Somewhat comfortable. Nobody says, "Are you nuts?" Okay, good. So I'm shocked. I mean, I know that not everybody is a librarian, but Lord knows we have control issues. Okay, so people are somewhat comfortable. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. Okay, so yeah, I think that that looking at breaking things up. So I've been talking for a really long time, and and it's really, really helpful to sort of break things up. It's hard to do that in a webinar, of course, but here are some strategies for getting people engaged, mixing it up a little bit. We really, as people, have an attention span for listening to somebody talk for about 15 minutes before we start to tune out. So in a face-to-face presentation, it's really, really nice to be able to break that up and get people talking or to get them doing things. So one thing that I really like to do is a think, pair, share. So basically, give somebody a topic that they can think about. A classic is, how would this apply to your library? You give them some sort of idea. How would it apply to your library? People think about it, they pair with the person next to them, and then they share out loud with the rest of the room. That gamification I was talking about in my outcomes, it's basically bingo. So there are a lot of free bingo creation tools, so you can create your own bingo slides. I'm going to send you a link to one. So I like to find words that I know I'm going to use in my presentation, some key words, and I put them in a bingo slide, and I give people bingo sheets. And when I say those words, they put their daubers or their markers down on bingo, and and then and then whoever gets the full line of bingo wins a prize, and that's usually some candy. But it's just a nice way to keep people engaged. Finally, Poll Everywhere is a really great software. And it's something where you can kind of create the polls like I'm doing here in Adobe Connect, but you can embed them in your PowerPoint. And if you, I don't have a link to it, but if you Google Poll Everywhere, you'll find it. And it's free for up to 40 responses. People use their phone to connect. So you text a keyword into, and you text it to a certain number. Your certain number is up on that slide. And so you can actually poll people using their phones. It's free for 40 responses. And then if you want unlimited responses, you pay $65. It's a flat fee for that. So I really, really like that. And I think that that's really a good software for if you teach class and if you're doing a presentation. It's always kind of good to use that. Okay, and so that's softwares. I know we're getting down on time here. Movement is the next thing that I really want to talk about too. And one of my, a lot of people have a hard time. They like to stand behind the podium. I think it's really, really important if you can. I know that sometimes the microphone is there and you really have to use that. But I think that if you can, it's really helpful to map out and plan for your movement. So get into your space the night before and think about, and you don't have to look like this crazy guy. That was just the best clip art I could find. Maybe you start out at the podium, but then you plan. So, and when I talk about this section, I'm going to move down, and I'm going to stand on this end. Moving into the audience, if you're not on a big hefty stage, is always really, really helpful because changing that point of view for the audience helps to wake them up again. So they're saying, oh, movement, there's change. So that's going to help move them up. Again, of course, center stage. I put that little guy there for the last 20 minutes because that's your PowerPoint. That's where you're going to park and bark is what they call it in theater. So I'm gonna park right here and I'm just going to talk. And I'm in the power spot. So I think movement's really helpful. A lot of people have issues with like what they're going to do with their hands. And again, that just comes back to being yourself, to calming yourself beforehand, and to use those gestures that you're going to use to really bring that point across. So you're using them to emphasize points. And again, that's focusing more on your audience than on yourself. So, so how can I use my hands to really emphasize what I'm talking about? Okay, next, I'm just gonna, I think we have one more here, final tip. Okay, feedback. So I think getting feedback is really important. Often conferences will take care of this for you. You get a feedback slip that they fill out. Sometimes, but they don't ask the questions that I really want to know though. I think that often getting really good feedback will help to inform your practice, and it's going to tell you what you did really well and what you should keep doing, and then what you could change. So what could I improve upon when I'm doing this? And I actually have a little survey for you guys. I'm going to copy and paste that and put that in the chat too. And I hope that those are going to, you guys might be, oh, thank you. I'm putting it in the presenter chat and Megan's, thank you, Megan, putting them in the other chat. I got a little confused there. So yeah, getting that feedback is really, really helpful. And I know that it's really informed me in so many ways. It taught me again, like, stop reading your presentations. It's not working for your audience. So guys, that's really it for me and your top 10 tips. We have about 5 minutes left. I'd love to answer any questions that you have. If you just want to throw those in the chat box, I am here. I know that we have one here. Latifa. So thank you for your oh, thank you. Boo, boo, boo. I'm just gonna, it's a little cut off here. Okay. How can train yourself so that you during how can you train yourself so that you don't get affected by how your audience looks at you during the presentation? Sometimes there are people who are nodding their heads. I love that, me too. But how about those who look uninterested, bored, or not clear whether they are enjoying your presentation or not? That's a really great question. And that can be one of those moments where you just, again, the back sweat, you're kind of getting really nervous. You're like, oh, I'm losing them. I'm losing them. You know what? That's when it's a really good time to switch it up. So have something in your back pocket. Have a think, pair, share. Get them moving. Get them thinking on their own about themselves. So that's how I like to switch that up and really, and keep them on their toes, right? Also, movement. So if I see some people who are really disinterested, I'm going to move right next to them and I'm going to talk to them. So I'm going to get up in their grill, not like in an aggressive way, but I will, I'll start kind of moving toward them. And that's kind of, again, that's attention, that movement. Oh, okay. So he's moving toward me. He's in my space. So that's really kind of how I do that with disinterested people. And then again, you kind of really have to, it comes with time, but not let that bother you. And it's kind of like leadership. You really want to take that those people who are interested and bring them over to your ideas. And you're not going to have everybody on board, and that's okay. And you just kind of have to let that go. And that's part of that giving up control. So great question. Great question. Anybody else? Oh, could you mention about filler words? Yeah, filler words. Like like those are filler words. So is another one. I think that comes with your practice. It comes with your nerves. So again, looking at those warm-ups, how can you get yourself centered? How can you get yourself to really think about your breath? Also, get out of your head. So be very direct about your energy, your focus. Right now, I'm getting my point across to these people. I really want to make sure that they understand this. I'm being very direct with my words. If I'm very direct and I'm focusing my energy on those people, it's really hard for me to use filler words because I know that my point isn't really getting across as much as I'd like it to. Also, if you have a confidant, someone, a colleague, to come and to help you identify, they pick one thing that they're going to look at when you're presenting. And if it's filler words, by all means, let them identify where you had the most filler words. Where did it just go crazy? And that's where you probably are the least confident in what you're talking about. So those are the areas where you could practice more and more. So I hope that helps. What is the ideal duration for a successful presentation? I think that really varies. I think an hour is probably pretty good. 50 minutes, even better. And I think if you go beyond that, you're really going to lose some people. One other thing too, which I am not doing today, is no one ever hates you for ending early. So I don't think I've ever met anybody who's like, oh God, we ended so early. Except, I mean, if you promised them an hour and you gave them 30 minutes, I don't know. But if you went 45, no one's gonna hate you. So that's that. That's my idea. It's gonna vary for you. If you're doing a workshop, it's gonna take a little longer, but it's always important to take breaks if you're gonna do a day-long workshop, obviously. Any other questions? Megan's typing. it doesn't look like I have anymore. Yeah, Megan, take the mic back.
Okay, so thank you, John. That was a fabulous webinar. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to email John at Watts, JOH at webster.edu. There's also the link to the Qualtrics survey if you would kindly fill that out. I think I can say on behalf of everyone who was here today, John, that we learned a lot and we had a great presentation. It was loaded with fun jokes. I did have to laugh. One of your, how you said making jokes can sometimes not work out well. You talked about going to Walmart and buying bacon, and that's just not something you would be doing here in Egypt. So I liked that it actually was applicable. So thank you, and if anyone has questions, let us know. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much. Yay, thank you guys. Do, do, do.